You'll have worked out by now that the Trotter family was rich. And you'd be quite right. Alexander, Lilius's father, was in banking, and work sometimes took him abroad. There were maids, nursemaids, and governesses working for the family and living with them, too. That meant that when Lilius was 5 years old, her mother was able to go on a business trip to America with her husband, even though by then there was another child, a little boy named Alec. "I'm going to miss you, Mama," Lilius said, not long before they were due to leave. "I'll miss you too," her mother agreed, "but I'll write to you telling you all about America." "What are you looking forward to the most?" Lilius asked her father. Mr. Trotter didn't need any time at all to think about that. "I'm really looking forward to going on the American railroads," he announced, grinning like a boy setting off on an adventure, which was exactly what it felt like to him. Mr. and Mrs. Trotter, their eldest son William, and a maid were away for 4 months altogether. During that time, their mother wrote to all the children. Lilius especially loved her letters and looked forward to the postman's arrival. To us, today, the letters sent to a small child seem very grown up. For example, when telling Lilius about an American sunset, Mrs. Trotter wrote that there was the most exquisite shades of coloring from clear blue, shading to pale green, and then to a most glorious golden color. But young though she was, the little girl saw in her mind's eye the colors her mother described, and she could paint them in her sketch pad, too. "What are you doing today?" Emily asked. It was pouring rain outside, and there was to be no afternoon walk with their governess. "I'm going to paint the sunset Mama wrote about," she told her sister. And she did. First, she wet the paper all over so that the colors would have no hard edges when they dried. Putting some blue paint on her brush, she dragged it across the wet paper and watched as it left a line, but a line that moved. As she watched, the blue pigment moved along the wet sheet, fading as it went further from the line. And then she did the same with the deep golden yellow paint, taking it across the paper from the other side. "What are you doing?" Emily demanded, grinning at her sister's antics. "I'm making the paint move," said Lilius, holding the wet sheet in the air, first with the top of the sheet upwards and then to one side, with that side on the top. Emily came over to watch and laughed. "I don't know how you do it," she said. "That really does look like sky." Jacqueline joined them. "Where did that green come from?" she wanted to know, for the painting now showed a blue sky turning to green and then gold. But there was no green paint on Lilius's paint dish, only blue and yellow. Lilius grinned. "It's my secret, but I'll tell you. I put blue and yellow on the wet paper, and when the colors moved about on the sheet, they mixed together and made green." The governess was watching and listening. "She's a clever little girl, that one," she thought. "Maybe one day she'll be a famous artist. I wouldn't be surprised." The Trotter home was not only full of children, there were pets, too. One, a kitten, was Lilius's favorite. Now, if you've ever lived with a cat, even a young kitten, you'll know that they don't need defending. They can stand up for themselves. This particular kitten, which was being teased by Lilius's older brother, scratched him for being annoying. Lilius, who didn't like to see the kitten teased, sprang at her brother and hit him with one hand and grabbed the kitten with the other. Because she wasn't usually a violent little girl, the family remembered that day for years. And she wasn't allowed to forget it either, for that day her brothers nicknamed her Tiger Lily, and the name stuck. By the beginning of April each year, the Trotters would start thinking about holidays. "I wonder what we'll be doing this year," was usually said by one of the sisters for the first time about then. "I hope we can go back to Cromer," Emily said. "Oh, I love it there." All that afternoon, as they walked in Regent's Park, the three girls talked about Cromer. They had been there several times and had good memories to discuss. "I like sitting in the sand reading a book best of all," said Emily. Lilia said that her favorite things were hunting for wildflowers and then painting them. "My favorite thing about Cromer," said Jacqueline, "is that it's in England." All three giggled, and then Jacqueline went on. I quite like studying French and German at home, but it's different having to speak it to French and German people." "I don't mind speaking it to them," said Emily, "but it's when they speak to me I have problems. Sometimes they talk so fast." Lilias, the youngest of the three, knew exactly what they meant, but it didn't bother her one bit. She loved going to Cromer, on the north coast of Norfolk, and she loved family holidays in Europe just as much. There were always different and interesting things to see, and different and interesting things to draw and paint. Mr. Trotter always took his paints on holiday with him, and the girls did too. Drawing and painting were very popular hobbies in the mid-19th century, especially among girls from wealthy families. Visiting art galleries was another favorite thing to do, and Lilias and her sisters loved it. In Mr. Trotter's dressing room was a table that was special to all his children. There were drawers under the tabletop, and each child in the family had his or her own drawer. "These are your little gardens," he told his children, one by one as they grew old enough to enjoy the treat. "And if I find anything that would be especially interesting to any of you, I'll put it in your little garden for you to find. Of course, if your brothers and sisters are also interested in what's in your garden, I'd like you to show it to them." Now, this sounds like a game for small children, but it was much more than that. When they were little, Mr. Trotter put things in there that little children love. Things like pine cones, new shiny coins, picture books, and other such treasures. But as they grew older, they found more grown-up things in their garden drawers. Lilias was especially pleased when she found leaflets about art exhibitions or science talks or special news about the botanical gardens. The last two drawers were for Alec and Margaret, Lilias's little brother and sister. Sometimes Mr. Trotter wrote letters to his children and put them in his drawers to be found. He sounds like a kind and a thoughtful father. In 1863, when Lilias was 10, she had a photographic portrait taken. She wore her best dress. It had long sleeves and a wide skirt with a frill round the bottom that came well below her knees. The dress looks white in the photo, but it may have been very light-colored. Puffed sleeves were very fashionable, and she was right up to date. In the photo, Lilias's long dark hair has a center parting and is tied in a bow at the back. She's holding a doll on her knee. Photographs were serious things in those days. 10-year-old Lilias looks serious in her photo, but not because she's in a bad mood. If you've ever seen photos taken in the 19th century, you'll see that people very rarely smiled and very rarely showed their teeth. One reason for that was when someone had a toothache, their tooth was just pulled out to stop the pain. Many folks kept their mouths shut to hide the fact that they were missing their front teeth, although that wasn't the case with Lilias. Just a year after that photo was taken, Mr. Trotter started to feel ill. It was as if a shadow fell over that unusually happy home. There was no cure for his illness, and he died when Lilias was only 12, and Alec and Margaret were still quite small. It was still a very busy house, as all but her two oldest brothers were living at home, but it was a sad place, and for Lilias, it was as if there would be an empty space in her heart where her papa used to be.